A mother picking up the phone, voice steady but barely holding, trying to sound in control while speaking to police, because when Mageline Emile reports her son missing, she's not just filing paperwork, she's already trapped in that quiet, suffocating dread that something is seriously off, because Dwight DJ Grant isn't the type to disappear, not the type to ghost, not the type to leave his people hanging, and as Miramar police roll in, on paper it's just a missing 18-year-old, a few hours gone. Nothing unusual, except it doesn't feel that way, because when someone like Dwight vanishes, responsible, grounded, tight with his family, it doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like something stopped him, like his story got cut mid-sentence, and that difference matters, because this is how it starts, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and creeping, and time doesn't tick, it sprints, every hour hitting harder, harder to explain, harder to fix, and while officers knock on doors, map his last moves, his family can't sit still, so Mageline starts searching herself, calling friends, checking hospitals, retracing everything, doing what no parent should have to do, because deep down she already knows, this isn't ending simple, and then everything flips, because desperate for answers, she checks surveillance, and what she finds isn't a lead, it's something worse, something immediate, because on that footage, near home, she sees Dwight. And he's not leaving, he's being attacked, overpowered. And just like that the story changes, this isn't missing anymore, this is violence, and when police hear it, urgency spikes, because now they're racing against time, and as investigators dig in, what comes out feels unreal, because this didn't happen somewhere hidden, it happened in a neighborhood, a place people trusted, but witnesses describe chaos. Blood, movement, even fire, one person feeding flames while others just stand there, frozen, detached, and that contrast raises questions, because behavior tells its own story, and this one points to something dark, something that didn't just happen, it escalated, and as detectives start connecting people to Dwight's last moments, the circle tightens, because truth leaks through fear, through cracks, through hesitation. Like one line that says everything, I do, but I don't want to go to jail. And now it's not just what happened, it's who was there, who acted, who watched, and who's ready to talk, and as the timeline builds, one thing locks in, this wasn't random, wasn't an accident, something shifted in those final hours, and the people there know exactly what went down, even if they're not saying it, and for Mageline, every new detail doesn't bring closure, it just shows how far from home he really is, and how dark the truth is about to get. And that moment, watching that footage, breaks everything, because when she realizes those aren't strangers but people attacking her son, time splits into before and after, and with it comes anger, sharp and immediate, because this isn't disappearance anymore, it's captured violence, undeniable, and when officers arrive at the stairwell, the scene hits hard, blood everywhere, smeared, partially cleaned but not enough, because you can't erase that kind of violence, and the space tells its own story. Broken bushes, signs of struggle, movement, resistance, a fight that didn't end quick, and details like a footprint start locking pieces in place, and as they secure the area, one thing's missing, Dwight. But not for long, because just steps away, hidden behind bushes near home, they find him, and that thin layer of uncertainty disappears, because now it's confirmation, and what they see shows multiple injuries, chest, abdomen, neck, deliberate, repeated, and that says everything, this wasn't accidental, this was sustained violence, and while officers process the scene, documenting everything, his family is right there, pulled by instinct, and officers hold them back, not out of coldness but because the scene matters, but for a mother feet away, she doesn't need words, she already knows, and while investigators move carefully, confirming identity, preserving evidence, the reality is already set, this is no longer a search, it's a homicide, and the questions shift from where he is to what happened, who was there, and how this unfolded so close to home. The confirmation comes quietly, heavy, final, because when Dwight's father sees the photo, hope is gone, and the case shifts fully, now it's about how he died and who made sure he didn't come back, and the medical findings make it clear, multiple stab wounds, blunt force trauma, blood loss, this wasn't quick, this was endured, he fought, and that kind of violence points to something personal, not random, so detectives retrace everything, especially the footage, because it shows more than the attack, it shows the lead-up, a girl approaching Dwight, visible, no disguise, blonde streak in her hair, and he's comfortable, even playful, giving her a piggyback ride, which changes everything, because now it's someone he trusted, someone who could walk him straight into danger, and then the tone flips, because inside the stairwell are two masked individuals already in position, and when Dwight tries to leave, they pull him back. And for the next 20 to 30 minutes, movement shows this wasn't quick, it was prolonged, deliberate, and the girl stays nearby, not attacking but not leaving, acting like a lookout, and that's not passive. And eventually, his body is moved, carried, dropped, dragged, showing not just violence but aftermath, and now investigators know at least 3 people were involved, but the key is the girl, because she's the one he trusted. And that lead breaks the case open, because that girl is identified, Christy Parisian, and suddenly this isn't strangers, it's someone in his circle, and when questioned, her story starts shaky, claiming coincidence, saying she met 2 masked men randomly, but nothing about the footage supports that, because timing, positioning, it all looks planned, not random, and as pressure builds, cracks show, especially when she admits she handed over a knife, turning her from witness to participant, and the more she talks, the more it unravels, especially when investigators find messages between her and her boyfriend, Andre Clemens, messages talking about violence, even one saying, "Murder is going to happen soon," and now this isn't a situation gone wrong, it's something anticipated, and when another name comes in, Jason Smith, the picture sharpens, because her account shows coordination, roles, movement, being told where to stand, how to act, even how to avoid cameras, and that's not impulsive. That's structured, and inside the stairwell, Dwight is cornered, restrained, outnumbered, and what follows isn't chaos, it's controlled escalation, with weapons introduced, violence repeated, and even as he pleads, there's no break, no hesitation, just continuation, and after, they don't call for help, they clean, they burn clothes, they try to erase it, which says awareness, not panic. And when everything comes together, messages, footage, evidence, it tells one story, Dwight was lured, trapped, and killed through coordinated action, and all 3 are arrested, with Christy and Jason later taking plea deals, while Andre faces trial, but even that doesn't fully play out, because just before it begins, a plea is reached, and the case resolves. Not because it's weak, but because it's already overwhelming, and in court, the weight is heavy, especially when Dwight's mother speaks, not in legal terms but in loss, everything that won't happen now, everything taken, and Andre is sentenced to 40 years, but even that doesn't feel like closure, because nothing brings Dwight back, and in the end, what started as something small, a meeting, a conversation, a girl with blonde streaks walking toward a stairwell, ends as something irreversible. Because Dwight followed someone he trusted, and never walked out. And that's exactly where everything starts to crack wide open, because as the investigation zeroes in on Dwight's final moments, the biggest break doesn't come from tech or luck, it comes from his mother, who refuses to let this go, because when she watches that footage, she doesn't just see an attack, she recognizes someone, a girl from his school, someone who should have never been part of anything like this. And that one detail flips the case, because now there's a name, Christy Parisian, and just like that, this stops being about unknown attackers and becomes about someone inside Dwight's world, someone he trusted, and what makes it hit even harder is that it wasn't police who found her first, it was his mom, going through phone records, making calls, chasing every lead until she unknowingly reaches the same person who was there before everything went wrong, and by the time detectives step in, they already know this isn't just a witness, this is someone tied directly to the timeline. Someone they need to press immediately, because the camera's already told part of the story. Now they need to see if her version holds up, but even before the interrogation starts, something feels off, because when officers arrive, her reaction doesn't match the situation, no panic, no confusion, just this almost irritated calm, like she's dealing with an inconvenience, not a homicide investigation, and while her own mother is still trying to process what's happening, detectives are already moving fast. Locking down the apartment, preparing a search warrant, treating it like a possible crime scene, and that alone tells you how quickly suspicion built, because you don't secure a home like that unless you believe evidence might be inside, and still, through all of it, Christy stays detached, even when she calls her mom, her tone casual, like nothing serious is happening, and that disconnect raises the question that follows her straight into the interrogation room. Why isn't she reacting like someone who just witnessed something this violent? And as detectives start breaking down her story, watching not just what she says but how she says it, the cracks show early, because she claims she randomly met two masked men on the way to see Dwight, framing it like coincidence, like bad timing, but the footage says otherwise, because what investigators see is coordination, people already in position, timing too clean to be accidental, and that kind of setup doesn't just happen, it takes intent, it takes planning. It takes someone bringing the target exactly where they need to be. And then she drops another name, Andre Clemens. Her boyfriend, mentioned almost casually, someone she says she was trying to make jealous, and right there, detectives hear what they've been looking for, motive, because jealousy can flip fast, turning something small into something dangerous, and now bringing Dwight there doesn't look careless, it looks intentional, because he didn't end up in that stairwell by chance. He got there because he trusted the person leading him. And as she keeps trying to paint it as random, the evidence keeps pushing back, suggesting those masked attackers weren't strangers at all, but part of something set up in advance, something that depended on her role being played exactly the way it was, and now the pressure builds, because detectives are staring at two stories, hers and the evidence, and every inconsistency closes that gap. And the more she talks, the clearer it gets that her version can't explain everything, the timing, the setup, the length of the attack, her behavior during it, and as those gaps widen, the focus shifts straight to Andre, because if this was planned, someone had to be at the center of it, someone had to decide this would go from emotion to action, and at this point, one thing is already locked in, this isn't random anymore, it's a small group of people whose decisions collided in one moment, and for Dwight, the hardest truth is this. The person he trusted enough to follow may have been the reason he never made it out. And as the interrogation deepens, her story doesn't just raise questions, it starts collapsing completely, because what she's describing doesn't line up with instinct, and detectives feel it, starting slow, then pushing harder, trying to understand how a simple meetup somehow turned into a perfectly timed ambush by two random men who just appeared at the exact moment, yet everything she says leans on coincidence. Claiming she only went to see Dwight to get back at Andre after he cheated, and at first it sounds emotional, impulsive, believable, but the deeper they go, the more it falls apart, because if it was truly random, nothing else that night should line up this clean, but it does, the timing, the positioning, the duration, and most importantly, her presence through all of it, because when asked what she was doing during those 15 to 20 minutes, her answer stops everything. She says she stood there, back turned, listening to someone fighting for their life, and still didn't run. Didn't call for help, didn't do anything, and that alone doesn't sit right, because even fear makes people move, but she stayed, and then she adds something worse, something that shifts everything, admitting she handed over a knife, and right there the narrative breaks, because now it's not about witnessing that it's about enabling, because giving a weapon during an ongoing attack isn't hesitation, it's participation. And detectives lock onto that immediately, pressing her on why she hid it at first. And her answer, fear, doesn't explain cooperation in the moment, and as they keep pulling at the story, more pieces fall apart, like her claim that the attackers were strangers, because investigators know the building, know who lives there, and even confirm no one like that exists, and now it's not just inconsistent. It's fabricated, and under pressure she shifts again, bringing in Andre and another name, Jason Smith, saying after the attack they all went to a lake and burned clothes, not to hide evidence, but to cheer her up, and that explanation doesn't just sound weak, it sounds impossible, because people don't respond to a killing with a bonfire, they destroy evidence when they know what happened matters, and that's exactly how detectives read it. As cleanup, as awareness, tying all three of them together even after the violence ends, and piece by piece, fake attackers, impossible behavior, delayed admissions, burned evidence, the pattern becomes clear, because this isn't someone caught in the wrong place, this is someone trying to step back from a plan that already played out, a plan that needed her there, needed her to bring Dwight in without suspicion, and as detectives keep pushing, one truth stands above everything. This wasn't random, it wasn't accidental, and the real story isn't about strangers, it's about a tight circle, relationships, emotions, and decisions stacking up until there was no turning back, and for Dwight, the most devastating part is that the person closest to him in those final moments wasn't a stranger, it was someone he trusted. And when you zoom out, the whole thing shifts again, because what looked random starts feeling staged, like something already in motion before Dwight ever got there, because behind the scenes there were messages, tension, jealousy building, and when detectives dig into those messages, everything changes, because they don't react to violence, they anticipate it, talking about stabbing, referencing Bonnie and Clyde, turning it into something almost imagined before it became real, and one message stands out: murder is going to happen soon. Not after, not in shock, but before anything even happens, and that's the moment the case stops being about chaos and becomes premeditation, because now it's not something that went too far, it's something already heading there, and when Jason's account comes in, it sharpens everything, because she describes being told what to wear, where to go, how to act, and inside that stairwell, what unfolds isn't random, it's structured, coordinated, Dwight cornered, restrained, outnumbered, and when he tries to run, it's already too late, and the violence that follows isn't chaotic, it's controlled, escalating step by step, even including explanation, confrontation, then execution, and when he pleads, there's no pause, no break, just continuation, and that's what changes everything, because once intent is clear and action keeps going, this isn't something out of control, it's something being carried through, and everything else lines up, they entered together, moved together, left together. Cleaned up, burned evidence, and that sequence removes randomness completely, because this didn't just happen to them, it's something they were part of from start to finish, and maybe the most haunting part is the realization that comes after, because even in their own words, you can hear that shift, that awareness that the line between being there and being involved is already gone, because in the end, that stairwell wasn't just where violence happened, it was where planning, emotion, and action all collided, and where the truth only became clear after it was already too late to change anything. And as investigators continue reconstructing those final moments, something else starts to stand out, not just what happened, but how it's being told, because when Jason lays it out, there's no panic, no breakdown, just detail, almost like she's replaying something she's already gone over in her head, step by step, describing how Andre told her to follow him down. How to position herself to intimidate Dwight before attacking, and that detail hits again, because it shows stages, setup, pressure, escalation, not chaos, and she explains how Andre gave direct instructions, telling her where to stand, when to move, when to act, and then comes the moment detectives focus on hard, the order to grab him, and according to her, she does it, not leading, but following, step by step into something she claims she didn't fully understand, and from there, the violence ramps up fast. Dwight is pushed into the corner, restrained, Andre starts hitting him repeatedly, and Jason admits she's holding him down, physically involved, close enough to feel everything happening, yet still trying to frame it as just a fight, and that's where her story starts clashing with reality again, because nothing about what she's describing looks like a fight, and then another detail drops, Christy noticing the surroundings, the cars, the possibility of being seen, telling them to hurry up, and that adds another layer, because now there's awareness of risk while it's happening, not confusion, not panic, awareness, and then it escalates again, because Jason describes Andre switching from hitting to using a blade, stabbing toward the neck, even pointing out the right side specifically, and for investigators, that detail matters, because it matches what the autopsy later confirms, and then she mentions something else. More than one weapon, a smaller knife and a larger, almost sword-like blade, and that changes everything again, because now this isn't just escalation, it's preparation, because having multiple weapons ready means this didn't start empty-handed, and as she keeps going, she describes Dwight fading in and out, pleading for it to stop, even asking to be killed to end the pain, and those moments hit differently, because they show not just violence, but how long it went on, and through all of it, she says she kept holding him when told, and at one point describes Andre holding Dwight's upper body while she holds his legs, locking him in place, and that physical setup, multiple people restraining one person while continuing the attack, that's not chaos, that's controlled, sustained violence, and then it ends the way she describes it, quietly, because she says Dwight just goes quiet, and that phrase lands heavy, because of how simple it sounds compared to what it actually means, because in that moment, everything stops, but not because anyone chose to stop, but because there was nothing left to fight back. What stands out most to investigators isn't just what Jasmine says happened, it's how she keeps saying it, because across multiple interviews, the core story doesn't shift: the stairwell, Andre Clemens controlling everything, the weapons, her role in holding Dwight, DJ, Grant down, Christy Parisian staying close during key moments. It all stays consistent, and in investigations like this, consistency doesn't always mean truth. But it does mean structure, something built, something thought through. Not something made up on the fly, and as her account moves past the attack itself, it opens up a whole new layer, the aftermath, because she describes being told to help clean up, to get supplies, to move Dwight's body, to hide him temporarily, and that detail matters more than anything, because it stretches the timeline beyond violence into what comes after, and that's where investigators draw a hard line. Because impulsive acts usually end in panic, but coordinated ones move into concealment, into damage control, into decisions about what happens next. And she also talks about feeling drained, detached, almost shut down, something investigators recognize in people exposed to extreme trauma. But in her case, that emotional numbness sits right next to active participation, and that's where things get complicated, because when law enforcement starts lining her story up with real evidence, surveillance footage, forensics, movement patterns, it starts matching in key ways, even while other parts still don't add up, and eventually, all three, Jasmine, Christy, and Andre, are arrested for Dwight's murder. And even in custody, the tone shifts again, because recorded conversations between the girls don't sound like shock or denial, they sound scattered, focused on detention, uniforms, who else got picked up, even wondering about Andre. And for investigators, that matters, because it shows awareness of consequences, not confusion about what happened. And when Andre is arrested the next day, he doesn't talk, asks for a lawyer, later brings up a psychiatric evaluation, something noted but not overread. And when Christy is questioned again, detectives push hard on the gaps in her story. On what she knew, when she knew it, how things went from jealousy to something this extreme, and under pressure, she circles back to where it all started: rumors, relationships, betrayal, emotions building long before that night. And then there are the messages, the ones between her and Andre, including one that stands out above everything: murder is going to happen soon. And no matter how it's explained later, that line changes everything, because it shows the idea of killing wasn't sudden, it was already in the air, already spoken, already real in some form. And even then, she claims she didn't think it would actually happen, that it was just talk. But investigators are left with something else entirely: a victim who didn't walk out of that stairwell, injuries that show coordinated violence, and evidence that people knew things were escalating before it happened. And in the end, every version of the story, no matter how it's told, leads to the same point. Dwight walked in alive, and he didn't walk out, and no explanation changes that. And as the case builds, what prosecutors start focusing on isn't just the brutality, it's the structure behind it, because when they go through months of messages between Christy and Andre, they don't see random emotion, they see planning, timing, discussions about location, about avoiding detection, about getting Dwight into the right position. And from their perspective, Christy's role isn't passive, it's what they call bait behavior. The person who makes first contact, who creates a sense of safety, who brings him into a controlled space before everything else unfolds. And that sequence, approach, delay, then confrontation, isn't coincidence, it's coordination. And even when she tries to minimize it later, investigators don't see confusion, they see something common in cases like this: self-protection mixed with emotional attachment, because at the time she's not just facing charges, she's still tied to Andre emotionally, and that affects how stories get told, how blame gets shifted, how intent gets softened. But when they line everything up, messages, surveillance, injuries, DNA, movement, they don't rely on one version, they build from all of it. And what they see is multiple people involved, roles shifting but always moving toward the same outcome. And the presence of weapons, linked back to Andre through purchase records, pushes it even further, because now it's not just escalation, it's preparation. And even her explanation of fear, of being stuck in the moment, gets weighed against the timeline, because from her view, it happened to her, but from the investigation's view, there was awareness before, presence during, and no withdrawal after, and that's where the legal line forms. Between what someone says they thought, and what their actions show they were part of, and at the center of it, Andre is seen as the one driving it, the one whose messages point to timing, even suggesting it would happen before a certain point, turning emotion into something scheduled, something planned, and even the conversations after arrest, talking about detention, outcomes, who's been picked up, add another layer, not proving the crime itself, but showing awareness, and when physical evidence comes in, burned items, DNA traces, movement caught on camera, it all connects, showing not just what happened in the stairwell, but what happened after, attempts to clean up, to hide, to erase, and in cases like this, that kind of behavior matters, because people don't try to cover something up unless they know exactly what it is, and when everything is put together, messages, evidence, statements, footage, the conclusion becomes clear for prosecutors. Dwight was targeted, brought into a controlled space, restrained, and killed through coordinated violence, and that's why all three were initially charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy, because in the law, it's not just about who delivered the final act, it's about who helped make it happen. And even as the legal process moves forward, the paths split, because Christie and Jason take plea deals, second-degree murder, 25 years each, a move that often reflects strategy, securing convictions while building a stronger case against the main defendant. But Andre chooses a different route, heading toward trial, holding on to his right to challenge everything in court, and as that final phase approaches, the case shifts again. Because now it's not about finding out what happened, it's about presenting it, laying it out piece by piece in front of a jury, but even strong cases don't always make it that far, because right before trial, the defense pushes for a plea, and that moment isn't just legal. It's personal, because the decision doesn't sit only with lawyers, it involves Dwight's family, especially his mother, who now has to decide whether to go through a full trial, to hear every detail again, every message, every injury, every second of footage, or to accept a resolution without reopening everything in public, and that choice carries weight, because by then, this case isn't just evidence and arguments, it's loss, it's memory, it's everything that's already been taken, and in the end, they agree, choosing closure over process, knowing that no outcome, no sentence, no verdict, can undo what started in that stairwell, when a moment that looked ordinary turned into something final, something irreversible, something that changed everything forever. Not because the case was weak, but because it was already overwhelming in what it had proven, and by the time the plea is accepted, the outcome feels less like a negotiation and more like a formality, because the case against Andre Clemens doesn't collapse before trial, it resolves before it even begins, and in legal terms, it's treated as a conviction for the most serious charge, first-degree murder. Built on a record so strong, digital evidence, physical proof, consistent statements, that reasonable doubt barely has room to exist, and when sentencing arrives, the weight of everything that's been uncovered finally settles into one place, because the courtroom isn't just filled with lawyers and investigators, it's filled with families, Dwight, DJ, Grant's family, carrying a loss that can't be measured, and also the families of those being sentenced, facing the reality that they're losing their children in a different way, to decades behind bars, and that's what makes this moment hit differently, because this case doesn't end with one life lost. It ripples outward, touching every person connected to it, and when Dwight's mother stands to speak, everything shifts, because this isn't legal language, it's personal, it's raw, it's the kind of truth that doesn't need structure, because she's not just talking about what happened, she's talking about what's gone forever, the milestones that will never come, the conversations that will never happen, the future that just stopped. And in that moment, the courtroom goes quiet in a way that's impossible to ignore, because everyone feels it, even the people who do this every day, even the judge, who has to pause, because the weight of it isn't something you just move past, and later, Judge Ernest Cora reflects on that weight, calling it one of the most difficult cases he's handled, not just because of the crime, but because of what it represents, a situation that started with something small, jealousy, tension, a relationship falling apart, and escalated into something permanent. Something irreversible, and from the bench, he lays it out clearly, how quickly things can spiral when emotion, group dynamics, and access to weapons collide, especially among young people who don't always see how fast a moment can turn into a lifetime consequence, and when sentencing is handed down, 40 years in prison for Andre, followed by lifetime probation, it reflects not just the law, but the path that led there. Not the maximum possible, but still a sentence that defines the rest of a life. And outside that courtroom, the reactions don't really divide in terms of understanding. Everyone knows what happened. They divide in emotion, because for Dwight's family, there's no sense of something being restored, no feeling that anything has been fixed, just the acknowledgement that the system has done what it can, that responsibility has been placed where it belongs, and for others, there's reflection, maybe even disbelief at how quickly everything escalated, how decisions made in moments of anger and emotion led to something that can't be undone. And that's the one thing every perspective shares, the understanding of permanence, because Dwight D.J. Grant doesn't come back, not after the sentence, not after the plea, not after the case is closed, and that's why the people closest to it don't talk about closure, they talk about consequence, about a life that was interrupted, a family that's been changed forever. And choices that started small but ended in a courtroom where the only thing left to decide was how the law would record what had already happened, because in the end, the justice delivered there is procedural, it follows rules, it reaches an outcome, but the loss it's responding to isn't, it's human, it's permanent, and it doesn't go away.